Welcome to Advanced Watercolor Portraiture. In this course we're going to paint a portrait that has two figures in watercolor. We'll use some lightboxing techniques, we'll use some watercoloring techniques, some advanced, some basic, and we'll use some Prismacolors to help manage the lighting. We'll also be discussing a lot about lighting as we go along. This is the photograph we'll be using as a reference to create our watercolor portrait. Alright, let's visit some of the tools that you can use for your watercoloring effort. This is a cheap little watercolor set that I purchased from Walmart. If you're not very serious about doing watercoloring and you don't want to spend the big bucks on a high-end set, you can find something like this at Walmart. It has plenty of volume in it, definitely give you some good practice, and if you don't end up using all of it, then it's no big deal. We talked about the natural sponge. Well, you'll be looking at that a little bit later in the film. When you're actually doing the tracing that we'll look at, have yourself some sort of pencil. This is a lead holder and then an eraser. This is a kneaded eraser that you can get. You can also just use a regular eraser. The one thing you need to know about the lead in your pencil that you're using for your lead holder is that it needs to be very light, like a 4H, maybe a 2H. But if you can get a 4H, that'll keep you from making heavy marks that show up in your watercolor later. I also happen to use Prismacolors. They're basically coloring pencils, but with a very thick wax that lays heavily onto your paper. You can get a kit like this. You can also just buy some Crayolas for the purposes of this exercise. The Prismacolor happens to be a higher end brand of coloring pencil that professionals use. Have you some brushes. You don't have to have as many as I have here. Just a variety of brushes. Maybe a round brush, something for getting a lot of water, something a little bit larger, and then a detail brush would be nice that you can use. You might want to have a mixing knife, or just for the short-term purposes, if this is your first lesson, then grab yourself a knife out of the kitchen or whatever. You're going to use it maybe to mix some colors together. And then something for the palette. So here's I'm using styrofoam plates. Talk more about those a little bit. And here's an example where I mixed some red and some blue together to make a purple that I use in the portrait. Oh, and don't forget a cup of water. You'll use that for cleaning up your brushes, and also some paper towels would be nice. Alright, the first part of the lesson is going to be how to transfer your photograph or the portrait that you're trying to paint to the medium. So in this case, the watercolor paper. There are a lot of techniques you can use. You can trace using onion paper. You can project it onto a wall using a projector. But one of the common techniques is what's called lightboxing. And it's basically a device that allows you to print out whatever the portrait is that you're trying to transfer. In this case, it happens to be the mother and child painting we're going to do. And what I've done here is printed out 4 8x11 sheets of paper, and 8.5x11, and I taped them together at the seams. So this is going to make a 16x20 portrait, and you can do the same thing with the software, whatever software you have on your computer, if you want to do something this large. Otherwise, you can just make it smaller. So here I've taken this and put it in quadrants. I'm going to show you how I lightbox this onto the watercolor paper that we use for the portrait. But first off, a little bit about light boxes. Okay, so a light box is actually just a little tray system. This is an 11x17 light box that has a fluorescent bulb in it. It has a white container on the bottom to reflect all the light. And then it has a piece of acrylic that's been matted so that it distributes the light evenly. There's a little button on the side here that turns it on. And now you have a nice backlit environment that will allow you to do your tracing. And if we take our original portrait and we lay it down and then lay our watercolor paper, and this is the watercolor paper here, it's just a sample of what we use for the actual painting, and lay that right on top, we're ready to do our tracing. And so we'll do that in just a moment. But before we go that far, let me show you a way you can make your own light box at home, in case you don't want to go out and buy a light box. And they're really not that expensive, but that's something more seriously. If you're more serious about light boxing, you can buy one. So here is the glass and frame from a regular photograph. This is an 8.5 by 11 frame, or an 8 by 10 frame. And what we're going to do is we're just going to steal the pane of glass out of that. We're going to put on a couple of stacks of books, if you can see the books there, laid across the top here. And then underneath I have a lamp. Now this is a camping lantern, but you can use any sort of desk lamp you want. Just stack the books up however high you like. Try to put a little white piece of paper under there to reflect as much light as you can upward. And I'm going to turn the lights off here. I'm going to move our photographic reference onto the glass. Now this is a little small, of course, so that's why you might want to get something bigger for your light box. You can do any size glass as long as you have enough light coming through. Turn off all the lights in your local area, and now you have essentially your homemade light box that you can use for tracing the portrait. So it's a fairly easy way. Then you come across the top and you start tracing it. I'm going to use the light box, but I wanted to show you this technique because this is what I used for many years before I actually purchased a light box. Alright, the first thing you want to do after you have printed out your reference art is to tape it to the watercolor paper. Use masking tape or painter's tape. Don't use Scotch tape or some other heavy tape because those things are meant to be as permanent as they can be. Masking tape and painter's tape are meant to keep from damaging the surface to which they are adhered. So tape it down, that way it doesn't move, and you can peel it up later, no problem. Flip it over, turn on your light box, grab your pencil and your eraser in case you need to do some erasing, and then turn off your local light source. If it gets too hard to see, you can always turn the light back on just to make sure you've covered all the areas. Okay, but you just sit here and you start tracing out the image. It takes a few hours or a few minutes depending on how big the drawing is and how detailed you want to be. And remember, what you're doing here is you're giving yourself a structure around which you can paint your watercolor. It doesn't have to be highly detailed as long as it's structurally accurate. Remember to try to capture some of the lighting references in your photo. That'll help you when you do your watercolor. You can get the structure in here, and also, unless you're trying to change the lighting of your reference, or if you're trying to change the lighting of your painting to be something different, which that's possible, depending on what you're doing, especially if you're trying to combine 2 or 3 portraits into one piece of artwork, you might very well change the lighting. But if not, use the lighting references a little bit. What I mean by that is, right here we have the structure. A good example probably is around the baby's hand here. The baby has a lot of nice little shadow, so capture some of that. Trace around that shadow so that you remind yourself when you're doing the watercolor of where those shadows lie. And you're going to obviously have the painting right next to you on your computer or as the physical photograph, whatever you have, to refer to, but it's also nice to go ahead and capture what you can in the watercolor. No shading. Don't shade anything in. Just leave real light, thin pencil, because you are trying to minimize how much pencil shows up in your final watercolor, or at least you might be. So I'll turn this off. I'll turn on the light now. Turn off the light box, and then show you what this ends up looking like. So you can see here, very light pencil outlines, very basic structure that you'll use to fill in your watercolors. And that's what lightboxing is all about.